Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, we have Amanda Schuler, who is the Director of Policy and Performance at the Adult Protective Services Agency. Thank you, Amanda, for joining us today. And I will be turning over the reins to Amanda for her presentation. First, I want to talk about some information about our agency. The Governor's Committee on People with Disabilities has a mission to further opportunities for persons with disabilities to enjoy full and equal access lives of independence, productivity, and self-determination. GCPD recommends changes in disability policies and programs in the areas of accessibility, communication, criminal justice, education, emergency preparedness, employment, health, housing, transportation, and veterans. The committee also supports a network of committees on people with disabilities, issues awards to promote greater awareness, and promotes compliance with disability-related laws. For this webinar, the chat is disabled. So please use the Q&A section or tool that you have at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And please ask questions more generalized than focus, maybe specific on a given situation. Some things are probably better asked one-on-one than in the group setting. So, if there might be some very specific questions that she cannot answer given the nature of the question and the specificity. So please use the Q&A for more generalized questions. And after the webinar is completed, you will get a Zoom link where you can see a recording of the webinar and the PowerPoint presentation as well. And the email should also include a link to a survey so that you have an opportunity to give us feedback. So at the conclusion of the webinar, you'll have an opportunity to do the survey at that time or wait until you get the email link. So thank you, everyone, and I will turn it over to Amanda.
Thank you, Matt. As Matt said, my name is Amanda, and I will be your presenter today. I'd like to begin by sharing with you all the APS mission and how APS came to be, and then we'll move on to some more specific information about our program. So our mission statement is to protect older adults and people with disabilities from abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. We do this by investigating and providing or arranging for services to stop or prevent further harm to individuals. Next slide. So the APS staff, we can't just go out to people's homes and begin our investigations. There are laws in place that give us our authority to investigate. So in the mid 1970s or so, the United States Congress passed Title 20 of the Social Security Act. And that act required that each state develop some sort of a program to protect children, elderly adults, and adults with disabilities from abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And so Texas in the 1980s enacted Chapter 48 of the Human Resource Code. You'll hear me refer to this code and statutory authority throughout the presentation. But what the Human Resource Code, Chapter 48, does is it provides the statutory authority for Texas APS to complete these investigations of this abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation of elderly persons and persons 18 to 64 with a disability, and to provide protective services to those individuals. Our APS program further defines our ability to investigate and provide services in the Texas Administrative Code and through specific program policies. So we took these laws that were given to us at a state level and enacted program specific, more detailed governing practices and policies. Next slide. All right. So the American Community Survey is a self-reported survey. Some of you may have participated in this survey, some or seen it or read about it or heard about it. But when I was reviewing it, there were just some things that kind of stuck out that I wanted to share with you all today. So first, the survey identified that approximately 12.1% of Texans have a disability. The Houston metro area and the Gulf Coast account for the majority of these individuals. Education, right? 19% of individuals that identified as having a disability have a bachelor's degree or higher. So going forth and receiving their educations so that they can actually go into. Next topic is our workforce. Construction actually employs most of these individuals, and then the next followed by restaurants and other food service providers. And then obviously you start with
Before
education.
we continue,
Mhm.
I just would like to add that we are working on fixing the captioning. I see it's not working right now, so we are working on that. Please bear with us as we continue through the presentation.
Okay. If at any point you want me to pause, just let me know. All right, so we've established the education, then they go into the workforce, and then individuals um, individuals with the high school degree earn on average about 29,000, but those who actually furthered their education and got a bachelor's degree or higher earn on average about $75,000, which is higher than the midpoint for most working Americans. So that's amazing. Again, this survey is self-reported, and so the numbers may not be as accurate as you may see in other surveys that are done more on a national level, and this is specific to Texas. Next slide, please. All right, APS jurisdiction, right? We investigate allegations of abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation of individuals who reside in the community. This could be private homes, adult foster care homes, room and board homes. There are also specific situations when an individual may reside in a facility type setting, such as an assisted living or a nursing home. And those are looked at on a case by case basis and have specific parameters around those, but we'll discuss those a little bit later in the presentation. So when APS receives an intake that doesn't meet our jurisdiction, though, it doesn't mean we close it out and don't do anything about it. We want to do our due diligence to protect the individuals that need assistance. And so even though the allegation, the area of concern may not be something that we have authority to investigate, we do make referrals to other entities that do have investigation authority. And so that could be law enforcement, Texas Workforce Commission, and then there's various HHSC programs that we refer to. So again, just because we may not investigate it, we are doing our due diligence to ensure that somebody is made aware of this situation and can do an investigation into it. The Adult Protective Services Handbook also has an appendix that provides information about various settings, includes the type of services that are offered in those settings, and the care that's provided in those settings, whether they're subject to licensure, and then it also tells you who has the authority to investigate. And that link is on the slide for you all. You can click on that or go directly to our handbook. Additionally, the Adult Protective Services Handbook is public, and so you can go on anytime to the website and look at it. All right, next slide, please. So we're going to get a little bit more in depth into our policies. For APS to investigate, we have to ensure that the client or the individual that the concern is made about meets our criteria. We also have to ensure that if there is somebody named as an alleged perpetrator, that is the person causing the abuse, neglect, or exploitation, that they also meet for us to investigate. And then, of course, the allegation itself has to meet our definitions to investigate. Again, if it doesn't meet, we will refer back to other jurisdictions to complete that investigation. So next slide, please. First, we have client eligibility. So in Texas, an APS client is somebody who is age 65 or older, or an individual age 18 to 64 who is considered to have a substantial impairment, or somebody who is an emancipated minor who is also identified as having a substantial impairment. To determine, when I use the term substantial impairment, we define that as an individual with a disability that grossly and chronically diminishes his or her physical or mental ability to live independently or provide self-care or self-protection. Okay. So to be considered substantially impaired, an adult must be between the ages of 18 to 64 or an emancipated minor. And then our staff look at whether there is a mental, physical, intellectual, or developmental disability. And that can be indicated by many things, right? So it could be a diagnosed medical condition. And that can be from any type of professional when I say diagnosed. But it's also like what's observed and reported, right? If that is consistent with such a condition, like APS always errs on the side of caution, and we would make that individual a client. Just because somebody doesn't have a diagnosis, like we encounter people often that have never, seen a doctor, but we're not going to turn them away just because they don't have an official diagnosis. We are going to ask general qualifying questions and make sure that we are addressing those needs. Something important to remember is that our clients don't have to meet financial eligibility requirements. Like whether you are destitute or whether you're a multimillionaire, it doesn't matter. We investigate everybody as long as they meet our criteria. So as I mentioned earlier, most of our clients do live in their homes. However, if a client lives in a licensed facility and there are concerns for abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation by an alleged perpetrator, and that individual is not affiliated with the facility, then we would investigate that. Also, allegations of financial exploitation occur, unfortunately, more often than not when an individual is in a nursing home or an assisted living facility because somebody else is typically managing their money. And so we would investigate financial exploitation allegations in those situations, even though that individual is in a facility setting. But all of this being said, there's no need for you to worry about whether an individual would meet or not. If you have any concerns, please report that to APS, to our hotline, and let our staff make that determination. So now we'll move into talking about who APS investigates, right? As mentioned earlier, sometimes there is an individual who we call an alleged perpetrator, who is stated to be committing the abuse, neglect, or exploitation against the client. So the first type of alleged perpetrator is a caretaker. And a caretaker is a person who, by their actions, words, or course of conduct, have acted in a way as to make a person conclude that they are the ones that have accepted that responsibility to provide that food, protection, and shelter to the client. Right? So only somebody who is identified as a caretaker can be investigated for neglect. If they have not assumed that role, we cannot hold them responsible for an individual's care. Keep in mind that we do investigate family members also, but a family member does not automatically meet the definition of a caretaker. And so you would still have to assess whether that family member is a caretaker. And when I say family member, that often has a very broad definition. And so the way APS looks at a family member is someone that's related to the client, either by blood, marriage. Marriage can be official or common law, or adoption. And then the last type of perpetrator that we investigate is an individual who has an ongoing relationship with the client. And so this isn't, like your mailman, right? So you could say, oh, there's an ongoing relationship because they drop off the mail every day. No, that it doesn't quite meet. And so not only do they have to have an ongoing relationship, but it has to be a frequent and regular interaction. And the assumption is that interaction will continue, right? And the relationship also has to be beyond that of a contractual agreement. So landlord tenant issues, unless the landlord was also like the representative payee or possibly a family member, we would not investigate landlord tenant concerns. We would refer anything like that to the housing authority, possibly, depending on what the situation, or maybe even law enforcement. So, on rare occasions, we also have minors, which is an individual that is 10 years or older, 10 to 17, but there are sometimes allegations against minors. And so in these situations, we do investigate, and we notify the parents of our investigation. Again, not your responsibility to determine if somebody meets criteria as an alleged perpetrator. Report it to us and we'll take it from there. Next slide, please. All right, so we've talked about client eligibility, alleged perpetrator eligibility, and now we're going to talk about the actual allegations. So when I say allegations, what that means is an assertion that an individual is in a state of harm or at risk of harm because of abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation. For the remainder of this presentation, I will refer to abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation as ANE. It's a mouthful to say those terms every time. So for allegations, they must meet our criteria. This includes ensuring that the allegation in and of itself meets our definition as defined in Chapter 40 of the Texas Administrative Code, that the allegation occurred while the client was in Texas, and that it was within the last 6 months or is an ongoing concern. And lastly, the allegation must identify that the client is currently in a state of A&E or is at risk of being of A&E in the near future. And by near future, we typically identify that as about a month's time. So now we're going to go a little more in depth onto each type of allegation. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Right. So our first allegation type is abuse. Just the picture on the screen displays an individual with cuts and abrasions to their left forearm area. Neglect, abuse, we define as the negligent or willful infliction of injury, unreasonable confinement, intimidation, or cruel punishment with resulting physical or emotional harm or pain to the client. We also investigate sexual abuse, which includes any involuntary or non-consensual sexual conduct that would constitute an offense under the Texas Penal Code for indecent exposure or the Texas Penal Code for assaultive offenses. Okay, next slide, please. So on the screen, the picture displays an individual with bruises to their chest area. Abuse may be visible, such as unexplained injuries, bruises, burns, or lacerations. But keep in mind, these things can also be covered up. When individuals are ashamed or embarrassed about what has occurred, they often resort to covering up the evidence. They'll wear long sleeves, they'll make up stories about how the injury occurred, or they'll flat out deny anything has happened, even though there are indicators present, visibly present. So, next slide, please. Another form of abuse, on the screen, the picture displays an individual standing behind an elderly, covering their mouth and telling them to be quiet. So, when a perpetrator makes threats or intimidates an individual, this can result in emotional harm or pain. If you notice that a person's demeanor completely changes when an individual enters a room, that is something to be aware of, right? Additionally, if you see or experience a family member or caretaker using unnecessary force, and this occurs often when the individual is unable to verbalize their wants and needs, the perpetrator may become physically aggressive with them. So make sure that those signs are paid attention to, because it could indicate emotional or verbal abuse is occurring. Next slide, please. So the picture displays an individual looking kind of longingly away, with a sad look on her face. Oftentimes, abuse can come in the form of isolation. We see this a lot in our elderly client, more often in our elderly clients, but it does occur across populations. But it's isolation, confinement, or cruel punishment. And this can be either physical or emotional, right? An individual that's always talking about how dumb they are or incapable they are, it could indicate that somebody's telling them that. And so they begin believing it. They begin feeling this way about themselves. Also, abusers tend to isolate their victims for fear that the individual may tell someone about what is going on and that they could get in trouble. So these are some signs to be aware of when it comes to abuse, whether this is occurring to you or somebody you know, please report that to us. Next, we'll move on to discuss neglect. Next slide, please. So the picture displays a home kind of in disarray, an empty trash can, but trash all over the floor that hasn't been cleaned up. So neglect is defined as the failure to provide the goods or services, including medical services, that are necessary to avoid physical or emotional harm or pain. This includes a person failing to provide the services for themselves, or an individual, also known as a caretaker, failing to provide the needed services to an individual. So, when it's an individual failing to provide them for themselves, it's referred to as self-neglect. And then when it's an individual responsible for that care failing to provide them, it's known as caretaker neglect. Allegations of neglect are the majority of the cases APS receives. Neglect is often not intentional. It occurs for various reasons. It's no fault of the individual themselves. But neglect is one of those allegations. Like I said, it's one of our most common. It allows APS to provide goods and services as well when we determine that that situation is valid. Great. Next slide, please. So the picture displays a home with a freshly built ramp on the front. Being able to move around the community and access resources can sometimes be difficult and challenging. When an individual is unable to access resources such as transportation to appointments, get to the grocery store when they need food, or to the pharmacy to pick up medications, this can indicate neglect. Keeping up with housework and repairs can also become overwhelming due to an individual's disability, and it can result in unsafe or unsanitary living conditions. The soft spot in the porch becomes a hole, and therefore, an individual who might be in a wheelchair is unable to leave their home, right? Because it's not safe. In these situations, APS may be able to assist with a ramp or so the individual can leave their home, or we may identify resources in the community that can help an individual obtain one of these ramps. Next slide, please. So this slide indicates an individual in the shower, sitting on a shower chair, holding onto a grip bar. And so when an individual needs medical equipment, such as a walker, shower chair, or wheelchair to meet his or her physical needs, but's unable to purchase these items, or they're not aware of resources that may be available to assist them with these items, it may lead to this person being in a state of neglect. Again, this is something that should APS encounter this, we can assist with purchasing these items, identify whether the person's insurance might cover it, or identify resources in the community that could assist. Next slide, please. All right. So this picture displays a calendar with a schedule on it, right? It could be medication schedule, schedule of the day, other signs of neglect, and this is both self and could be caused by a caretaker, include under medicating or over medicating, malnutrition, dehydration, or poor hygiene. I'm guilty of it myself. On the weekends, I need a calendar. During the week, my work calendar keeps me in line. That tells me what I need to do. But on the weekends, I have to have my own calendar, or I too will forget to take my AM medications or my PM medications. So, having a calendar is helpful. An individual may be physically unable to do certain things, or there can also be a cognitive component that prevents them from being able to meet his or her needs. So whatever the reasons, these concerns should be reported to APS. What we do for any allegation type is we work to find the root cause of the issue so that we can develop a service plan to meet the needs of the individual, and we help to address and resolve the concerns that may be occurring. So next, we're going to go ahead and move on and talk about financial exploitation and what that looks like. Financial exploitation is defined as the illegal or improper process of the alleged perpetrator using or attempting to use the resources of the client for monetary or personal benefit, profit, or gain without the informed consent of the client. It's important to remember that financial exploitation, the perpetrator doesn't have to go through with using it. Even if they attempt to use the resources of the individual, that can be financial exploitation as well. When I say the term informed consent, what that means is that the consent isn't voluntary, or maybe it's induced by deception or coercion, or it's given by an individual who the alleged perpetrator knows or should have known is unable to give that informed, rational decision because they may lack capacity or have a mental or cognitive defect that would make them incapable of giving that consent. So it's not just that the perpetrator took the resources and used them because the client said they did. We also look at whether the client knew based on an informed decision that they were giving that perpetrator the authority to make that transaction. APS does not investigate theft or scams, but we would look at these to determine if, because of the scam or stolen items, that the individual is maybe in a state of neglect as well. Because we don't investigate theft and scams, we do refer those to law enforcement. Next slide, please. So this slide displays a picture of an elderly individual counting out change from their coin purse. Oftentimes, when an individual has financial means to meet their needs, but unpaid bills are laying around the house, disconnection notices, there's unexplained missing funds, these can all be signs that indicate financial exploitation. Although not always. It could also be that an individual is experiencing like money mismanagement, which we wouldn't look at for financial exploitation. We would investigate that for possible neglect. Exploitation, identifying whether it's exploitation, theft, or scams can be difficult to identify. So please just err on the side of caution. If you believe it is financial exploitation, report it to us and let us make that determination. Next slide, please. Okay. This slide displays an individual taking a $50 bill out of somebody else's wallet, and the individual whose wallet is being taken out is gripping that person's arm. So another form of exploitation occurs when an individual does not approve a withdrawal or a charge on his or her account. We see this very frequently when an individual gives someone else access to their debit card or checkbook to assist with daily tasks such as grocery shopping or assisting them with bill pay. And that person uses their access to the account to make unauthorized purchases. So a client gives their debit card to their provider to go to the grocery store to get their groceries, and the provider proceeds to make unauthorized purchases for themselves and buys their own groceries. That would be a form of exploitation. Next slide, please. So this slide displays two individuals going through the receipts together. So due to physical or cognitive limitations, individuals will add a friend or family member to their accounts to make things easier for them, right? Or they'll designate a representative payee or even a power of attorney. When access is given to an account, though, it's important to remember that that doesn't give them carte blanche. Like, we need to know why that individual is given access to the account. Things to kind of be aware of is, are there sudden changes in transactions on the account? Are there unexplained cash withdrawals? Are there changes to financial documents? This often occurs when somebody has made a power of attorney and the client's not aware that these changes have been made without their consent. So these are all signs that could be financial exploitation. Again, A&E are serious allegations and they should be reported at any time to APS. So if you or someone you know are experiencing any of these situations, or you're just not quite sure, report to APS and let us go in and look at the situation and decide what needs to occur. So now that we've talked about our allegation types, let's move into some other information. APS works with adults, and so we must respect their choices. Our clients have the right to refuse to cooperate with our investigation or refuse services that we may offer them. That said, individuals can refuse not to cooperate, but they can't refuse the investigation in and of itself. APS is mandated to complete an investigation on any case that we receive. And so Clients may tell us to go away, that they want to talk to us, but we still do our due diligence to determine if A&E might be occurring. And if we do determine that's occurring, we still offer services, and then the client can refuse those services as well. So there are certain situations that clients do not have the right to refuse in, and we'll go into those in just a bit when we talk about legal actions. Um, our clients also have the right to self-determination. That was mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. So our clients, again, are adults and can determine their own circumstances. This is a right that we are granted under law. APS also operates under least restrictive alternatives. So we don't want to intrude into our clients' lives, right? Like, we want to be there to help and assist, but we don't want to just go in and take over. So our caseworkers are never going to jump straight to, say, like nursing home placement. If an individual can't take care of themselves, like, we're going to look at other alternatives to keep them in their home. These other alternatives may include something like provider services, home health services, engaging family members to come in and help. So we're not just going to go straight in and take over. We start with least restrictive and work our way out from there. And just because our original plan doesn't work, we will circle back and form other plans. So as mentioned, although we operate under these guiding principles, there are certain situations in which a legal alternative may need to be sought to ensure that the client is safe from harm. Next slide, please. Legal alternatives. So as mentioned earlier, our Human Resource Code, Chapter 48, allows APS to seek legal alternatives in very specific situations. And these legal alternatives are used very sparingly, and they are definitely a last resort. So we try all least restrictive measures to the extent possible before seeking a legal remedy. Our legal actions that we are authorized to take, it's not the specialist making that decision by themselves. There are steps and processes. So it's the worker identifies it, they talk to their supervisor, and it goes all the way up to our legal division before any type of legal action is taken. But we are able to do them, like I said. So first, we have the right to access client records. This is typically done for financial exploitation investigations. We will request clients' records. We also have the authority to request the alleged perpetrator's bank records. And so we do that to try and identify whether or not exploitation is occurring. We also have court authorized entry. So if we feel that a client is in danger and we can't get into that home, then we can seek a court authorized entry. So there's also times, unfortunately, that there is an individual, other than the client, of course, who is interfering with our investigation or services. This is most likely to occur when an alleged perpetrator knows they are doing something wrong and they don't want us in the home investigating. So these are called an injunction against interference. And so what that does is it allows us to have police escorts to the home to remove that individual who is interfering with our investigation. And that allows our staff to go into the home and speak to the client. I know we talked about self-determination and the right to refuse our services, but this depends on the individual's cognitive ability to refuse services. So when we have a client who, per a medical professional, it's not our staff making this determination, but per a medical professional lacks capacity and they're refusing needed services to prevent themselves from being in a state of harm or neglect, we can petition the court for what's called an emergency order of protective services. And what that does is allows us to remove the individual from the situation on a temporary basis and place them into a safe environment until we can identify a long-term solution to meet their needs. This often occurs when the individual has nobody else to advocate for them, has nobody else to help in their um, plan of service, or who just flat out refuses wanting to leave their home. And, we can't leave individuals who don't have capacity to make that decisions. And so this does offer us a alternative to let our staff sleep at night, knowing that they have done everything to the extent possible to get that client in a safe environment. Another legal alternative, and this one is used probably the most sparingly out of all of these, is a referral for guardianship. And so APS has the ability to refer our clients to Health and Human Services guardianship program. And this occurs typically following an emergency release when there's nobody else to care for that individual. And the physician says they lack capacity, they can't return to their home. And so we make the referral to guardianship, and then guardianship, Health and Human Services guardianship staff go out and then they do their own investigation, determine if that's appropriate referral. Once we make the referral, we still stay in contact with the client and the guardianship worker, but once we make the referral, we have no say on whether or not that referral is accepted. It then becomes Health and Human Services and the courts to make that final determination. So remember, just the vast majority of our cases don't need any type of legal alternatives, but they are there in the event that we should need them. Next slide, please. So this slide displays a picture of an APS caseworker and talking to an individual, and it's knowing when to contact APS. And so it's very simple. If you suspect that you or someone you know is being abused, neglected, or financially exploited, call us immediately. We have staff on call, or we have staff available 365 days a year, holidays, weekends. We have on-call staff. So there is always somebody available to take the call and to go out and see our clients. If there are situations that that may also require law enforcement, such as when there is a life-threatening emergency, call law enforcement and then call us. Next slide, please. I know I've mentioned several times to contact us, but how do you do that? So first, Texas is a mandatory reporting state, and all of our intakes are confidential. We don't reveal the name of the reporter unless it's ordered by the court. And so that information is kept confidential. But there's actually several ways to make a report to APS, including phone, online, fax, or even mailing in a letter to any of our local offices. Reporters may use a relay service, including Relay Texas at 711. And then once the call is connected, just let the operator know to contact our statewide intake 1-800 number. Before contacting us, though, it's important to have as much information as possible about both the individual you're reporting on and the situation itself. Next slide, please. So this information includes the name, date of birth, and current address of both the alleged victim, so the person you have concerns about, as well as the details about the alleged perpetrator. A brief description of the situation, if there's any current injuries or medical conditions that exist, and then names and phone numbers of anybody else, such as relatives, neighbors, or friends that may also have knowledge of the situation. And then as a reporter, you should provide all appropriate contact information for yourself. Another thing that is in Chapter 48 of the Human Resource Code is that our staff are expected to contact all reporters to gain any additional information they may have and to clarify anything that may have been stated in the original intake. Next slide, please. All right. So what happens after a report is made to us? Well, once the report's made to statewide intake, the report is then sent to the area of the state where the person is located. And if for some reason an individual is in a hospital or another setting that's not in their primary county of residence, a worker in that area will go out and make initial contact. And then when the individual returns to their area of residence, we will transfer the case. So we want to get out to see our clients as soon as possible. All of our cases that we receive must be initiated within 24 hours of when the report was received. And the purpose of the initiation is to gather any additional information about the circumstances to ensure that the individual will be safe until a worker is able to make face-to-face contact. When a case is reported to statewide intake, they actually assign what's called a case priority. And case priorities are based on severity and immediacy of the threat or physical safety to the individual. So our cases are P1s to P4s, with P1s being the most serious and heinous that's occurring, and P4s are reserved for those cases in which the only concern is financial exploitation and there's no immediate threat to the individual. So during the case initiation and the face-to-face contact, our staff gather evidence, right? This can come in many forms. It can be testimonial, documentary. We make additional phone calls and follow-up visits as necessary when we have an open case. The expectation is that when we have an open case, we see our clients at least a minimum of once a month. And what we're doing during that time is we are monitoring what's occurring and ensuring that if we have set a service plan into place, that the services are moving along as they should. It allows us time to make referrals, to engage other entities, and to provide services that APS may be directly providing. So our staff monitor the service plan. And then once it is determined that an individual is not at further risk of A&E, we close that case out. APS does not provide long-term services. We are short-term services agency, but at any time a new case can be called into statewide intake, and if there's additional concerns of A&E, and a caseworker will go out and start the process over again. We want to ensure before closing cases that our clients, we've exhausted all efforts and that to alleviate the A&E and that we have not left our client in a state of neglect. Next slide, please. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to be here with you today.
Go ahead. We have a lot of wonderful questions, and so we'll try to get to those. And so we'll try to answer as many of those as possible. Amanda and APS has policy or procedures for interactions and those specifications for the case. So for example, if they receive sensitive information, that communication, they want to make sure they understand as much of the information with the individual with disabilities that affect the people with disabilities. So maybe it might not be appropriate to provide responses.
So are you asking if there's sensitive information, what do we do with that?
Oh, sorry about that. So maybe we need to switch the interpreters, please. Okay.
I'm going to rephrase the question. So I was saying that if I'm wondering if APS has any policies or procedures specifically for people with disabilities, where, because a lot of times there's a person without a disability controlling one with a disability.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering, do caseworkers or staff understand, are they aware of the distinction of the sensitivity of needs that people who have a disability might have compared to somebody without?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so our clients, again, they're 65 or older automatically. And so those individuals may also have a disability, right? They're not just aged, but they have a disability as well. Or we have those individuals 18 to 64 with that substantial disability qualifier. And so our staff absolutely recognize that client base and are aware that oftentimes these individuals are vulnerable and perpetrated against by somebody who does not have a disability. And so the way we investigate somebody, a perpetrator who does or doesn't have a disability, there's not a distinction between them. Like our job is to take care of our client. And so we do everything to the extent possible to do that. And then the perpetrator is kind of an afterthought, if you will.
All right, thank you for that. Another question is regarding complaints. People here on the webinar want to know more case information. Do AP, and if APS staff don't respond to those requests, is it um, maybe because of confidentiality, or how do people get case updates?
Right. So definitely confidentiality. If it's the client themselves, we can provide any information about the case to them. If the individual is a report or a family member and they are wanting case updates, we don't provide case updates. We do contact individuals such as the reporter or family members when we're trying to set up service plans, but because of confidentiality, we are not allowed to report back on all of our case actions to any individuals other than the client themselves or if they happen to have a guardian.
Thank you. There was several good questions here. If there's a suspicion the caseworker or an APS staff member is not complying with proper policy or protocol and doesn't do a full investigation, what is one to do?
You can call Office of Consumer Rights and they will route that to our executive leadership of the program and they will look into the complaint. And I hope that's not happening because that's very upsetting.
Right. One person has asked about systems, abuse, neglect, and things that might occur in a group home or hospital institution, abuse of maybe more than one person. How will that type of allegation be handled?
So if it occurs in a hospital, the hospital actually is tasked with the role of ensuring abuse and neglect is not occurring in those situations. And those are investigated by DSHS. And so if we receive that, we would just refer it on. And when I say the abuse could be either by staff in that setting or even by a family member, because the facility is responsible for that care, they are responsible for ensuring that family members aren't coming in and abusing and neglecting the clients. And so for hospitals, APS would not investigate. We would refer that. But for group homes, and that's going to depend on whether the facility is licensed. So if it's not licensed, APS would investigate. But if it's licensed or registered with the Health and Human Services, they would have the authority to investigate those allegations. And again, that's by staff member or another individual in that home.
Thank you for that. I'd like to go back to disabilities again. There's some people who have communication disabilities or possibly intellectual disabilities, and they can't necessarily describe what is happening to them.
Mhm.
In those types of situations, how does APS or the caseworker ascertain the reality of what's going on?
So APS offers interpreter services for various languages, for including ASL. We also, if depending on an individual's cognitive ability, we engage the Child Advocacy Center to help with some of our investigations because they have staff that are more equipped to do certain types of interviews. If somebody is nonverbal but able to, you know, voice cognitively or have the cognitive ability to voice what's going on, we also use pen and paper. We use platforms such as Teams to engage interpreters. Thank you, Matt. I just learned about the ASL a couple of weeks ago. But we also use the Teams platform when needed to utilize interpreter services. Our staff, to the extent possible, we always want to ensure that we are trying to gather information from the client themselves. And then in the event that we are not, we refer to, medical records, financial records, depending on the allegation, to help us with our investigation as well. So just because we can't communicate with an individual doesn't mean we just close the case. We still continue our investigation.
I see a few questions related to disability medical equipment, and that's probably a case by case situation. I'm hoping that APS staff and caseworkers have knowledge about how to get appropriate equipment, and if not, what would the caseworker or investigator do?
Right. So oftentimes individuals may qualify for certain medical equipment through their insurance. And so our staff may seek that. Depending on what the adaptive equipment is, it may be something that our staff can just easily go out and purchase. If an individual has home health or hospice services, we also engage them to determine if certain equipment is what an individual needs, or if they can even get that equipment for them. It is very case by case basis in those situations.
Oh, thank you so much. We have run out of time. There are more questions that I see. So if people have more questions regarding like policies, use the email that you see here on our screen to contact Amanda.
Absolutely. Thank you all again for the opportunity to be here with you today and share some information about our program. This is our direct policy mailbox, so feel free to email it at any time. And thank you all again.
Very well. Thank you. And everybody have a great day. Thank you.
Goodbye.